Restless Cascades will take a closer look at Mount Baker, the giant of northernmost Washington and the steaming threat of the far northwest. Here's Bill Van Amberg.
The ice-enshrouded steaming mystery of Mount Baker, 10,778 feet above northern Washington. The Nooksack Indians had a name for it, Kulshan, the White Steep Mountain. Geologists today have names for it as well, active and dangerous. In Earth-measured time, Baker is considered younger than some of the Cascades' big peaks. It started building about 400,000 years ago, making it about half as old as brother giants like Hood and Rainier. But it has been consistently active right up to the geologic present, and in the relatively short recorded history of the Northwest, Baker has perhaps been the most active peak. Early explorers and settlers often saw the signs of that. Clouds shot above the peak throughout the mid-1800s. And what they were seeing was probably similar to what we saw starting on March 10th, 1975. Even then, the most active heat producer of all Cascade volcanoes, Baker began a huge increase in activity overnight, pouring out 10 times more sulfur than before, pushing up clouds of steam 2,000 feet above the crater, and pumping out gas and heat from new fumaroles added to the old ones. It actually melted 150-foot deep sections in the mountain's ice cap. It was an obvious warning, but to this day, the expected next steps have not come. There have been no increases in earthquakes under the peak, that now familiar messenger telling us that magma is moving. As for movement of the Earth itself, it's hard to say. Tilt meters measuring that on Baker have been moved, needed for more pressing work in Hawaii. Still, activity continues on the mountain 5 years later, and Baker was the volcano everyone was sure would go next.
I'd have put my money on Baker primarily because of the steam activity, and St. Helens had not shown any indication that it was going to do anything. It caught us all by surprise, I think. It's a dormant volcano, not an extinct one, so we can expect it to erupt again. Critical thing is when, and that we don't know. There's no earthquake activity under the mountain right now, so we don't expect an imminent eruption in the next short time span, say, of measured in weeks or maybe months, unless we get some.
Boulder Creek is the danger area today. It's the reason the entire Baker Lake site was closed off in 1975. Not so much for fear of lava flows as of mud flows. Baker is smothered by ice, a 20-square-mile glacial ice cap. Heat from the crater could send a mass of melted material sweeping down this hillside, smashing right through campgrounds and on into Baker Lake. Should volcanics increase, that's the biggest threat.
Oh, mudflows by far, no doubt about it whatsoever, and especially with Baker, since it has so many glaciers on it, has a supply of meltwater for flooding and debris avalanches and mudflows, which could reach for long distances down the mountain if an eruption were to come up under some of the glaciers.
An even greater worry, hydrothermally altered rock. The massive heat from the steam vents can actually change the composition of the volcanic rock, make it soft, weak, and clay-like. Geologists fear a huge section of the mountain may come breaking or sloughing off that peak, crashing down Boulder Glacier, mixing with snow, ice, and rock, and tearing into the lake and beyond. Moving it up to 100 miles an hour, the mud-like flow of avalanche material could travel from the peak to the lake in less than 10 minutes. 6 times from 1958 to 1973, avalanches have followed that exact path on Boulder Glacier, but have never been large enough to reach the creek. Now, some geologists say that danger is as great as it was in 1975 when the lake was closed, and say it was a bad decision to open it back up. You won't find any warning signs on Baker Lake, though, and when people call it the Spirit Lake of the far north, it's meant as praise, not as prophecy. It's strange, then, that the main place to stay is presided over by a couple considered the Harry Trumans of Mount Baker. Baker Lake Lodge was closed off in 1975, but owners Ed and Betty Loomis refused to leave the mountain or the lodge, beating Harry to the punch by 5 years. Only their mountain didn't erupt. The lake opened again in 1976. Business hasn't been better. Everyone looks at the mountain a little differently these days, but Ed thinks people deserve to make their own choices.
After what happened at Spirit Lake, yes, any type of precaution would be advisable, but people are, well, they're not worried about it. They're not worried about that over there. They're willing to go over there and risk their lives on it, or they seem to be. They keep wanting to go in.
Yeah.
When they closed us down in 75, people would like to have come up and stayed off the lake, even to camp up in the area. They were willing to take the chances.
Yeah.
It should be left up to the public, I think. They're not scared. I've never talked with anyone that wants to leave because something might happen. There's never the thought of fear. It's just the beauty.
The region is incredibly beautiful. Ed gets visitors from Europe who say the Alps just don't compare. But if the view from the lake is unrivaled, so is the view of physical processes still at work. Lava flows make up most of the mountain's symmetrical size, about 95% of it, indicating perhaps that it is not as explosive as other volcanoes in the Cascade chain. Yet still, in recent geologic time, a pyroclastic avalanche of superheated gas and debris wiped out the Baker Lake area. The lodge itself is built on lava flows within the last several thousand years, and the glaciers have done less damage here than to other mountains because of fairly recent volcanic activity. The active vent, Sherman's Crater just under the peak, was formed a geologic blink of the eye in the past, less than 10,000 years ago. Folks here know most of that, but say they'd only be worried if the mountain stopped its daily steaming. They've got the life they want and figure it makes more sense to worry about the fishing than the mountain blowing.
So something that almost everyone wishes for, and we have it. So we're never one day do we think about that mountain and about it blowing up. But after what's happened to St. Helens, it could happen here someday, I imagine. We don't worry about it, but yeah, neither did Harry Truman.
Spent a lot of time on ranches and a lot of time on farms, but I was really welcome here in Mount Baker's arms.
Too hot?
Volcanics can be a calmer wonder as well. Unlike the more savage heat at the crater, these hot springs seem soothing and benign, like a gentle giant blindly nursing the creatures that huddle along its flanks. Yet its true intentions are buried beneath a freezing shield cap of gleaming glaciers. Baker's history belying a volcanic wolf hidden in a sheep's clothing of white ice.
It's obvious just by looking that Boulder Creek has been the site of a number of recent avalanches and mudflows coming off Mount Baker. It is considered the most hazardous area should the next activity happen on that mountain. In fact, it's very dangerous here, but it's dangerous on all the Cascade volcanoes. And the people who come here think it's worth the risk. In fact, there's just as good a chance that Mount Baker, Como Kulshan, the steep white mountain, will remain just another sleeping giant in the Restless Cascade Range. Next to Boulder Creek near Mount Baker, Washington, I'm Bill Van Amberg for Channel 2 News.
And tomorrow night on the 5 o'clock news, we'll take a closer look at volcanic giant Mount Rainier, the king of the Cascade Range.